Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
Hi, y'all. I'm Don Cotton, and I'm an alcoholic. I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to be sober. And there's a whole lot of folks in a whole lot of places that's glad I'm here and glad I'm sober. And I'm sure before the day's out, I'll tell you about some of that. First off, let me thank the committee for inviting me. I've never gotten it through my thick head yet that I had any right to be here just because I don't drink alcohol. I still consider it a privilege to get to sit in these rooms with you people because I have no right to be walking the streets a free man today. And you allow me to participate in my own recovery, and I thank you for that. I want to thank not only the committee that had me here, those of you who are responsible for every aspect of this thing, from the fruit baskets, which was very good, except I just got false teeth and there's a whole bunch of apples that there's a whole bunch of apples that hadn't got eaten. Those of you who were involved in cooking today, God, you know, to watch, and I've really, since I've sobered up, I've become a great observer of people. I've watched you this weekend. And to watch the way that this thing has fallen together has not been an accident. And to see you fulfilling your obligations that you had made somewhere along the line, that you would participate and you would do certain things, and every aspect of it seems to have gone very, very well. I've enjoyed the other speakers, including the Al-Anon. Wasn't that nice? You know, I've listened to Al-Anon talkers these things for a long time now, and I always wonder as I listen to them, why don't they try my solution? Drink! They don't ever do that. And you know what they tell me? It made me feel funny. I went to any lengths to feel funny. But I've enjoyed every aspect, and it's awfully good to be down south. I'll tell you, I'm working right now off in New Jersey and New York and Connecticut and Massachusetts, and I'd forgotten. I've only been away a month, but I'd forgotten until I got off the airplane at Jackson, and some little old southern gal said something, and I thought, God, that sounds good. I've been going to some meetings at a place in New York called Suffering New York. It's the funniest thing in the world to me when I go in there and they say, welcome to the suffering group of Alcoholics Anonymous. Strange people. And they've been meeting in this same church basement for 52 years in the same spot. Some of them look like they've been in the same spot 52 years. And they got a good group there. They really do. There's only one thing I won't do with them. I tried it one night, and I ain't getting that happen to me no more. They gather in a circle just like you and I gather in a circle. When I'm still saying Our Father, they're saying forever and ever. It's over. I mean, it's done. So I don't say the Lord's Prayer with them anymore. I just bow my head a minute. I ain't fast enough for them Yankees. And, you know, I finally got one over on them. The first night I was there, right at the end of the meeting, they called on me, and I said, told them who I was, what I was. And I said, I want y'all to know something. I really have enjoyed listening to y'all's funny accents. They ain't said a word to me about my accents after they quit laughing the rest of the time. And I felt right at home from then on. But it sure is good to be down home and down south. I don't know how many of you here before I've met in the past. There are several of you. Skinny's over here along with his beautiful wife, and it's always good to see them. Always. A friend of mine from over Tyler is coming through on his way to New York, and he stopped today. It's good to be with Bill. And I've known Karen ever since I sobered up. And because of a loving God as He's expressed Himself to me in this program called Alcoholics Anonymous, I haven't had anything to drink since March 24th, 1989. I'm not responsible for that. I wish I was. But if I were, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't need you people. I wouldn't need a program called Alcoholics Anonymous if I could stay sober on my own. You know, a while ago we had a couple of people come and get desire chips. I don't know who's been sober how long. It doesn't really matter. But I'm going to tell you something. If you're here and you're new, you're probably the person I want to talk to. Because, you see, Skinny's been around a long time. Anything I got to say, Skinny already said it. Not only did he already say it, he already experienced it. And thank God for people like him who've come before. But there are people like me that I'm not that far away from who I remember how I felt when I walked into these rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. I had some real misconceptions. I didn't understand anything even though I knew it all. I knew the price of everything and the value of nothing. If you had asked me something, I would give you an answer. Now, it would be the biggest crock of BS you ever heard, but I would give you an answer. And I thought when they gave their sobriety date, there must be a contest around here to see who could stay sober the longest. And I knew I'd already lost. There was no way. No hope for me whatsoever. You see, I didn't just decide one day that I'm going to walk into a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, check them good folks out and see how they're doing. I came out of an act of desperation and a simple little fact that nobody else would have me. I wandered into these rooms. And things you said didn't make a lot of sense. Now, I've got to tell you something. I was drinking when I wandered into those rooms. Some days today, what you say doesn't make a lot of sense, but it makes a heck of a lot more sense than it did when I was drinking coming into some meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, I have never had a slip. I want you to understand that. You've got to have a sobriety date in order to have a slip. And I was leaving, going drinking some more. I had done something about my drinking. I'd gone to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous so I could go drink. I was a long way from getting to Alcoholics Anonymous and didn't even know it. I was raised over in East Texas, and that means you're naturally, as a friend of mine says, you're raised closed-minded, and I was awfully closed-minded. I grew up in a little town that I didn't like. I didn't like the people about me. And from being a little child, I remember this. I have this problem today, and I suspect that some of you may have it. I have a problem with what I hear. What you say and what I hear aren't always the same. In fact, seldom are they the same. My father committed suicide when I was 14 months of age. Now, I never got to question him about whether he was an alcoholic or not. My mother says he was. His brothers say he was. Everyone that knew him says he was, but I don't know. But in any case, if that's what he was, he found a permanent answer to a temporary problem. That permanent answer was to eat the end of a shotgun. Now, they told me a story about him, and here's what I heard. They said, Don, your father always wanted you to walk, and you wouldn't walk. And the day they buried him, you started walking. Now, that sounds innocent enough. You know what I heard him say? Your father was so disappointed in you that you wouldn't walk for him that he blew his brains out. Now, that didn't make me an alcoholic, but it started me out with some perceptions of life and reality that were wrong. And I started out very young having a problem with what people said, what they were trying to say, and what I heard being two separate matters. As I said, I grew up in this little town. Somehow I knew that I didn't belong there. I didn't know where I belonged, but it wasn't there. You see, the people around me weren't quite good enough for the standards I was setting for myself. I couldn't belong to these people. I hated the little town that I grew up in. And I made myself a promise just as soon as I get out of here, I'm getting out of here. And I graduated from high school eventually. And I went to the University of Kentucky. That's about as far away from Brownsboro, Texas, as I'd ever been in my life. And I went on from there to some other places and wound up in Nashville, Tennessee, where I stayed a long time, and wound up back in Texas. Oh, there's something I forgot to tell y'all. At one time in my life, I was a Baptist preacher. I was a Southern Baptist preacher. Y'all remember that feeling you get when you take that first drink of booze? That's kind of how the Southern Baptist Church felt when I walked away. And after hearing their convention this summer, it's the feeling I had that I wasn't there anymore. I didn't say that. That'll get me in trouble. I pastored several Baptist churches. I had married shortly while I was in the seminary. And we had a son, the only child today that I know that I'm the father of. Haven't been informed of any others along the way. Our life on the outside was as good as it could possibly be, but I had a problem. I was up telling folks things that I didn't believe. Not a word of it. I learned how to say what I was supposed to say, and I became quite proficient at it. But I didn't believe any of it. And there was a war inside me, and I didn't know what to do about it. Things started happening in my life that were going to change things. Now, I'm pretending to be something I'm not. I've got this desire in me that I need to drink. I drank some in high school. I didn't control it then, no more than I controlled it the last drink I had. All I was able to do at that young age was to control the periods of time between taking a drink. And I would leave that wife and son claiming I was going away on church business, and I would be gone for 3 and 4 days, and I would drink. And the same thing happened then that happened the last time I took a drink. The minute I took a drink, I had no ability to control the amount I was going to consume. Now, you're going to hear me talk about some things like divorce. You're going to hear me talk about some things like jail. You're going to hear me talk about some things like bankruptcy. You're going to hear me talk about DWIs. That's not what made me an alcoholic. That's just the fringe benefits of alcoholism. And if you keep drinking like I was drinking, you will get to experience each and every one of those things. What makes me an alcoholic is not the terror that I brought in the lives of people, the tornado ripping through their lives. You see, this book, after I had sobered up and been sober a while, I got to reading it. And I read a line in there that says, hearts were broken. Sweet relationships were dead. Nobody had to tell me what that meant. I didn't have to have some rocket scientist and say to them, what does that mean? I'd experienced that. But that in itself is not what made me an alcoholic. What makes me an alcoholic is when I take a drink of alcohol, something happens. Something happens that does not happen to the average temperate drinker. And our good doctor, Dr. Silkworth, put it in such glowing terms when he says it's a phenomenon that happens to no other class of people. And it is a phenomenon known as craving. Happens to nobody else. You talk to a heavy drinker, they don't know what the hell you're talking about if you talk about having this mental obsession coupled with a physical craving. They'll look at you like you're crazy. They've never experienced it. You know, we've got a lot of folks in a lot of the different areas I go to that don't know the difference in a heavy drinker and an alcoholic. And Bill talked about that, and he says, you know, they may look like us and they may smell like us, they may act like us, they may even need to be put in the hospital. But you give them a sufficient reason and they'll stop drinking. I never found that sufficient reason. If you really loved her, you wouldn't drink like that. You don't know her. That was my attitude. Go to work and say, if you ever come to work looking like you look and smelling like you smell one more time, I'm going to fire you. I had to have a drink to digest that information. If you ever come home smelling like you smell and looking like you look, Don, I'm going to divorce you. And I had to have a drink to digest that information. It is no surprise to me that alcoholics drink. I was talking to somebody outside a while ago. We act like it's some big deal when one of us goes and gets drunk. No, it's not. That's the most natural thing as a duck quacking. The big deal is that you and I can stay sober one day at a time. That's the big deal around here. I'm going to stand here and tell you that I'm no miracle. Alcoholics Anonymous is the miracle. I'm just a very, very, very small part of a group of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm very privileged to be a member. Last night it was so well talked about the home group. I'm very privileged to be a member of a home group. It's always meant a great deal to me to have that in my life because I could lie to you. I'm a slick-talking, fast-talking dude, and I could lie to you. And I could tell you things that weren't true, but not there. Not there. They know me. Thank God. I mentioned to you that I was pastor in Baptist churches. Oh, what a time. I'm not going to do my fifth step with you. And you can be happy about that. I will tell you, Jimmy Swaggart and Jimmy Baker could have learned a thing or two. They got caught. And there's some deacons' wives up in Tennessee and Kentucky that hope I don't come back and do more harm than I would good, and they don't need to worry about it. I was pastoring in Nashville, Tennessee, a very nice, prosperous church. My wife was a nurse at a local hospital, and on April the 4th of 1979, she was on her way to work at the midnight shift in the cardiac care unit. She stopped at a red light, and a drunk driver broadsided her at 88 miles an hour. I drove over to the scene of the accident. Through a long series of events, I found out something was going on. I drove over there, and I'm not going to go into all the emotions that I felt at that moment. There was a lady who was a well-intentioned, well-meaning lady who came up to me that night and said, "Don, this was the will of God." I have since had to try to make amends to that lady, and I use that term loosely still. But I will tell you, if I had to have that kind of God today, you're looking at a walking, talking dead man. That is what she said to me, and I gave her answers that I will not embarrass your ears with having to hear. Well, I decided that I needed to get away. I mean, I had problems now. I got fears, I got guilt, I got remorse, and I got to get away and sort through some things. You see, I hadn't been faithful to that woman after being married to her for 10 years. I've been presenting myself as something I ain't. I've been, of God's sake, for all things, in a Baptist church drinking. Like none of them knew what that was, but we're not going to go into that. And I went out to California to visit an uncle of mine. I was going to be gone for like 2 weeks, and I was, as what I know now, restless, irritable, and discontented. I stayed 2 nights. And I got on an airplane to come back to Tyler, Texas. And a little airline attendant walked up to me and she said, "What is the matter with you? You look as though you had just lost your best friend." And I relayed to her what had happened. And she did the most magical thing. She may have saved my life. She said, "I'm so sorry. Let me bring you a glass of wine." And she brought me that glass of wine. Wasn't the first drink I ever had, nor the last. But I want to tell you something. It went down inside me, and that raging madness that was there, all that guilt, all that fear, all that remorse, went away. It went away. Did that make me an alcoholic? No. Don't think so. What happened next is what makes me an alcoholic. I would have torn that airplane apart that night to get some more. Thank God I didn't have to. She just kept bringing it, and I kept drinking it. And when I landed at DFW, I felt no pain whatsoever. Y'all, did I have an alcohol problem that night? No, not at all. I had a losing my wife problem. I had the way I'm living problem. And alcohol fixed it. And it didn't take all night to fix it. And from that point on, I knew that I had finally found my solution. I want y'all to know something. I stand here tonight as an alcoholic, or this afternoon. I'm not an alcoholic and nothing. Nothing. Just a plain, ordinary, garden variety alcoholic. Because if I try to tell you I'm an alcoholic and to something, what I'm trying to say to you is, y'all, I'm different than you are. I'm separating me from you. And when I do that, all of a sudden, I don't have to do the things you do in order to get well. So I'm just an alcoholic. And I do what alcoholics have been doing in the program Alcoholics Anonymous for a long time now. I take these steps. And just like when I took a drink, I take these steps and something happens. And it's always good. It may be painful as hell in the doing, but it is the result has always been a positive thing. There's some things in our book that I love very dearly. I could tell you about them, and I'm not going to read them to you. You know, you can read as well as I can, or I hope you can. This book says that we have no axes to grind. We have no lectures to be endured. I'm not up here to give you my opinions. I'm not up here to give you my thoughts. Who would want to hear those things? I'm up here to do one thing, and that's to share with you my experience, strength, and hope. And Bill writes in this book, and he says, perhaps you're one who's wanting to get over it. If you're here and you're new, you may be one of those. And you're already asking yourself the question, what do I have to do? Now, I love his answer. He says, that's the purpose of this book. We're going to specifically, not generally, we're going to get down to specifics, but here it is. We're going to tell you what we've done. Now, you think about that. If you come from where I come from, nobody's been telling me what they had done. They've been telling me what to do. And they've been telling me where to go. Not Alcoholics Anonymous. Alcoholics Anonymous says, here's what we've done. Do you know that they didn't know how important I was when I got there? They wouldn't even listen to the crap I was putting out. I'd tell them about my drinking. They wouldn't talk about my drinking. They'd talk about their own damn drinking. Like I wanted to hear it. They saved my life by doing that. Let me share something with you. The thing that scares me the most as I travel around May today is we got a whole lot of people sharing their theories about Alcoholics Anonymous. We got very few people sharing their experience of here's what happened when I took these steps. And that scares me. These steps are not to be theorized about for this alcoholic. They're steps that are to be taken and applied in my daily living. And something happens when I do that. I told you about that wife dying, and I must tell you that at one time I thought wedding cake was one of the basic 4 food groups. And I got married and divorced and married. And somebody asked me how many times I've been married, and I said, well, more than most, but not as many as some. And that's as close as I'm going to tell you. But I was better at that than anything else. And that was happening in Nashville. I was able, after I left the ministry, to get some good jobs, real high-paying jobs. I was at one time even named Vice President of Marketing for a large insurance company out of Florida, and I traveled the southeastern United States, Mississippi being part of that. And I'd like to tell you that alcohol destroyed all of that. I destroyed all that. I told you earlier I was trying to be something earlier that I never was. And here I am now trying to pretend to be something I ain't. And I had to have booze to take care of that. But something was happening, and it's called a progressive disease, and it was progressing. Things were happening in my life that I had never experienced. They're called blackouts. You know, when your mind goes on vacation and your body keeps functioning. And people began telling me where I had been the night before and who I had offended, what all I had done. And then there were a few of them that wanted to come looking for me and tell me where I had been and what I had done. I didn't understand that. Other things started happening. Not only was there divorce, there was all... Our book has a paragraph that describes it very well. I was having trouble with personal relationships. I couldn't seem to control my emotional nature. I couldn't be a real help to other people. You see, I'm a selfish, self-centered, self-serving individual. I didn't care about you. If you had something I wanted, I cared, just long enough as it took me to get it. And then I was done with you. Wonder why I never stayed married. You can't live like that unless you will become like I was, all alone. Now, the lies I had been telling myself were caving in. This was in August of '87. Things were bad. Nobody was around to look after old Don anymore. Nobody cared. Those good jobs, they were gone, and I had a reputation where they wouldn't hire me to shovel snow if it had been snow, and I cleaned that up a little for you. It just wasn't there. And I got a phone call from Texas, and they said my mother was ill. Now, I'd been with my old drinking buddy Glenn for 3 or 4 days drinking, and I don't remember the details of this. They're quite fuzzy. But there have been some of them people who've come and filled in the blanks for me. The more I drank, the sicker Mama got. And before the day was out, I told those people around me that I worked for and had worked with that my mama had died. I was living with a woman I had promised to marry. We'd even bought her a diamond on her MasterCard. And we were going to get married. Man, we were in love. And my mama died. The pastor and deacon of a church I'd once pastored came over, and they said I don't remember, but they said they had prayer with me, and I wept and carried on. And I got on an airplane the next day, headed to Tyler, Texas. Once I got to DFW, I picked up the phone, told my mother I was fixing to land in Tyler, would she come to the airport to pick me up? And she did. And she realized something wasn't just right. She didn't know what it was, but looking at me, she could tell something wasn't just right. And I had made a grave error in judgment. I forgot my mama don't keep booze at her house. And that night I got to experience some of the awfulest time of my life. I know that today they call it DTs. You know, where you're laying in the bed sweating and shaking and seeing things that ain't there. That was a horrible night. The next morning I get up and my mother wasn't too sick. She'd gone to work. And her phone started ringing. There were people in Tennessee wanting to know where to send flowers for this funeral. And I told them a funeral home. I mean, if you're going to carry something out, carry it out. Don't play with it. Well, they made a mistake and happened to come. Somebody called. There was all kind of confusion of some kind there. And somebody in Tennessee made the mistake of calling where she worked, and she answered the phone. Found out she was supposed to be dead, and she was very much alive. I got 3 sisters there in Tyler, and they all gathered. They used to gather a lot. And their standard statement was, did you hear what he did? My mother does not know anything about Alcoholics Anonymous being a program of attraction rather than promotion. She started promoting the dickens out of it. She poured me into her car and took me to see a sober member of Alcoholics Anonymous. The first time I had really ever gone and talked with anybody from this thing called Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, if they ever said it was Too Cool Anonymous or Hipsters Anonymous, I'd have been there long before. Alcoholics Anonymous? No, thank you. But I'm in a bind. Mom might not even let me stay there if I don't go see this feller. So I go. I used to say he talked for 4 hours. He probably talked for an hour. If you knew Don, you'd believe the 4 hours, but it probably was an hour. He did the strangest thing that had ever happened to me. Don talked about himself and his drinking and his recovery. And I'm sitting there screaming, but you don't understand. My case is different. Didn't you hear what I just told you I'd just done? And he talked about himself and his recovery. Could have cared less about what I'd just done. I went back to my mother's. She fixed a good meal. Next day she fixed a good meal. And I done got a con going again. I get a vehicle from one of them. And I'm off my way to the liquor store. And by now I've got the wrinkles out of my belly and things are going, I'm going to be able to somehow pull this one off. Even though I got people mighty upset. Don showed up on Tuesday night at my mother's to take me a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. He probably saved my life that night. Because I looked at him and I said, Don, I want you to understand one thing. I have many, many problems. But I am no blankety blank alcoholic. And I don't want nothing you got or what they got at them meetings. I don't know nothing about them, don't want to know. And I tell you what I'll do. If I ever need you, I'll call you. Until then, leave me alone. You know what he had the gall to do? He left me alone. And for 2 more years, I got to continue to experience those things that we experience. They got some narrow-minded highway patrolmen over there in Texas. They do not appreciate you driving down the highway at 89 miles an hour, 94 miles an hour, drunk. They don't like it. I hear them talking about intervention in these meetings. Those guys knew about intervention a long time ago. They intervened in my life and took me to the county jail. Had nothing to do with my drinking. I must have a heavy foot. That's what's getting me in. It never crossed my mind that drinking booze had anything to do with any of this. I was having some other problems. My hangovers were hurting so bad. Oh. So I would go down to the bar to see my buddies. They had the answers. Don't you remember? All of us in those bars were so wise. And I said to them, I've got these awful hangovers. What in the world am I going to do? And one of them told me to get me a stick of margarine and eat it. And it would coat my stomach and I wouldn't have any hangover. That stuff would slide right down. And the hangover kept coming. Finally, they told me, Don, you know them charcoal briquettes that you cook your hamburger on? I said, yeah. Conrad said, why don't you take you a hammer and bust one of them up? And then you swallow that thing. And whatever goes in your stomach, it'll absorb and you won't have a hangover. I want you to know that's a booger to get down. And then they gave me the best answer of all, the one I wanted to hear. Don, it's the mixer. Made sense to me. All that sugar in that mixer made sense to me. So I just drank it straight. And hangovers kept coming. Never crossed my mind it had anything to do with taking that drink. The first one or the last one. Just didn't make any sense. But they were worse and worse. I became self-employed. Don't you love that term? You know what that is? That's a good term for somebody like me to have an office to go to be unemployed. And that's what I was. On March 24th, 89, I'm driving to Lufkin, Texas. It's a long story where I was going. I'm not going into it now. But I get to Jacksonville, Texas, and they got some red lights there. And everybody but me stopped. and I plowed into the back of a truck that hauls septic tanks. And then I circled it 3 times and left. Now, I don't know if you folks are ever over in East Texas or not, but I'm going to give you a little piece of advice. There's a little black deputy sheriff down in Rusk, Texas, where they apprehended me with steam pouring out my car and radiator destroyed. That does not like for you to talk about his mama. I suggest if you go there, don't talk about his mama. He's got a nightclub that will take care of you real fast. One more time, I found myself laying in a jail cell for the same thing I'd been doing for so long now. And that night, something happened. I'm laying there and I thought, I can't go on like this anymore. The thought of getting out of that jail the next morning, bailing myself out, finding a way to get back home, and starting this merry-go-round all over again scared the life out of me. And the thought of not being able to get on that merry-go-round and start all over again scared the life out of me. And I got out, and I went home. Wasn't nobody there happy to see me. They had a family meeting. I stayed in that house for 6 days. I was too scared to go anywhere. I didn't know what I was going to do. It wasn't the fact that I'm about to go to jail and stay in jail a long time. That wasn't the scariest thing. The scariest thing was, how am I going to live without taking a drink of alcohol, or how am I going to live if I do take one? And I sat there in that fear. And they had this family meeting, which they were prone to do. My brother-in-law came to see me. And he said, I've got something to talk to you about. We've had a family meeting, and here's what we've decided. We thought when you were off up in Tennessee that things were getting bad with you. And then you came down here and displayed it for us. And we've had all we're going to take. Now, you can do one of two things. I got a bus ticket here, a one-way bus ticket to anywhere you want to go. And you can keep doing what you're doing. Or they can give somebody like you some help. I said, well, I hope it's not that blankety-blank AA. It won't work. And I wound up in a jitter joint up in Garland, Texas. The only thing they did for me is the only thing any of them are capable of doing. They dried me out. And they had a raging, sober alcoholic on their hands. I hear people say, well, I quit drinking and my life got so much better. I quit drinking and my life went to hell. Didn't know what I was going to do. And I stayed in that program for a while. I used to think it was because they cared so much about me, and it wasn't. I had real good insurance. They cared a lot about that. When I left there, they told me, you'll never stay sober. And I believed them. I wasn't trying to con anybody. I got home, and that brother-in-law said to me, you may have your mama and your sister's cons, but I know you. You ain't going to stay sober. And I knew he was right. But you see, I had nowhere else to go. So I went to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. Now I'm sitting there and they're talking about things I don't want to hear. They're talking about God from time to time, and I'm thinking, what are these people? What are they going to tell? I have sat at the feet of some of the most learned men about God. What are they going to tell me? And I get very angry. You see, I came to Alcoholics Anonymous with a mask. It's called anger. And I wore that mask well, and underneath it was nothing but fear. I've been afraid all my life somebody was going to find me out. And I sat there. And I tried to listen, and I couldn't hear. I found some of the most rude, crude, socially unacceptable people I'd ever met in my life. They cared more about whether I lived or died than whether or not they hurt my feelings. I thank God for people like that in Alcoholics Anonymous today. because in so being that way they saved my life. They didn't want to hear my stuff. We had this guy who was a retired neurosurgeon, and old Kenneth and I could not get along. I mean, we just couldn't make it. And I finally figured out in my keen out, isn't that something we talk about, the keen alcoholic mind? I didn't hear that Al-Anon talking about our keen alcoholic mind yesterday. If she had us, she'd have talked about how we went and peed in the linen closet. I figured out something. Kenneth's problem was Kenneth wanted to sponsor me, and I wasn't about to ask him. And finally I said to him, Kenneth, I know what our problem is. You want to sponsor me. And he said, boy, I'd rather have a sister in the whorehouse than sponsor you. See how they are? I'm about 9 months sober eventually. One day at a time with that horrible obsession to drink. It has not left. And I'm at that point that I don't know whether I'm going to live or I'm going to die. But I do know I can't go on the way I'm going, because the world was getting mighty gray. It was getting mighty ugly. And the feelings I had inside me were, I knew I'd gotten a little better because I had gotten homicidal rather than suicidal. I knew I was a little bit better. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I went to meetings. I'm here as living proof to tell you you can go to meetings and get sicker and sicker and sicker. I did it. That's my experience. I hope you never have to do that. I sat there on that Friday night, and there was a man and his wife who showed up that I had not seen at that meeting ever before nor since. They don't get to go out and go to meetings very often. They're quite elderly. And they were celebrating their 25th year of continuous sobriety. And old Charlie got up that night and he rambled and God knows what he said. I had no idea what he was talking about. I could have cared less. Toward the end of his little pitch, he said AA's 12 steps are a group of principles, spiritual in their nature, which if practiced as a way of life, may expel the compulsion to drink and enable the sufferer to become happily and usefully whole. I'm 9 months sober. That's the first thing I've heard in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I don't believe it. I went home and got my big book out and thought I'm going to find that statement. And I read the thing for the first time, trying to prove him wrong, and by God, I succeeded. It wasn't there. Now, I ain't about to ask some old goat at the meeting where it's at. You can't ask for help when you know it all. How can you learn anything? And you can't let them know you don't know for sure, even though they already know. And I went to a 12 and 12 study on a Tuesday night, and they happened to have just gone back through the book, starting all over, and they got to the forward, and guess what they read? That little statement that man had made that night. Now, I knew it must have worked for some of y'all because you kept saying it did. But I was still too different. But I'm at that point where I can't go on. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try taking these steps to prove to these people in Alcoholics Anonymous they won't work. That's how defiant I am. And I began to take these steps. I didn't do it alone. I got a sponsor. Somebody got the short straw. I got a sponsor. Now, you may have a problem understanding what a sponsor is. I'm glad to know a while ago our chairperson said his sponsor wasn't here, but I know sponsorship works. He was willing to be sponsored because he went home and put a tie on. I know it works. I went and got a sponsor, and let me explain to you about a sponsor. There's a story over in the New Testament, the only time I ever read this. It's about a guy named Philip who's an Ethiopian eunuch. Now, a eunuch is a male who's been castrated before the age of 2. That doesn't have anything to do with this story. But I thought you might be sitting there feeling sorry for yourself, thinking you had problems when your problems aren't near as great as you thought they were. But he's reading out of this book, and this guy comes along and says to him, "Do you understand what you're reading?" He said, "How can I, except some man should guide me?" And Philip became that Ethiopian sponsor. And you know how I know he became his sponsor? The next line, they got into action. They took some actions. That's how I know he really became his sponsor. And that's what a sponsor is in my life. Somebody to guide me through these 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And if my sponsor is not getting me into action, I don't have a sponsor. I got a friend. A friend that might just kill me. Think about it. I wouldn't dare begin to pick your sponsor for you. But if I had some of these sponsors that never had me take any actions, even though I didn't believe in them, I'd be a dead man. And I took these steps. I have taken these steps repeatedly. My life's changed. I told you I didn't believe anything. And they told me it didn't matter what I believed or didn't believe. Just take the actions. Just take the... I heard that so much I was sick of it. I had a lot of problems. And I began to write about those things. Once I'd gone through the first 3 steps of that sponsor, I began to write about those things. And he made me write about my part. Because, you see, I'd been wonderful at taking your inventory. I was doing it in Alcoholics Anonymous. Sitting back there in the back of the room. Every time one of you said something, I took your inventory. I was good at it. But I told you I was getting sicker and sicker. I began to write about my fears. I began to write about the people I had harmed. I began to write about the resentments that I had. And I made a list of my sex life. There it was. Not all that tough. The tough part was having to put my part in it. And I wrote it down. Not too tough. Sat down with another human being and shared with him that garbage. When I got through, we did some other things. And he had me go home and sit down. Now, I would like to tell you I left there and the birds chirped a little louder and the grass was a little greener. It wasn't that way. I was emotionally drained. I was whooped. And I went home and I sat for an hour and I thought about it. And then I did some things that I've been instructed to do. They're called steps 6 and 7, which I must be honest with you, I greatly underestimated. It later bit me in the butt, but I greatly underestimated them. I got with that sponsor, and we did my 8-step list. Now, this book says some things that I don't like to read. It talks about there may be someone, somewhere, who really has done you more harm than you've done him. But you're going to have to do something about it. You see, I was taught that if I would treat a resentment just like I would making an amends, I was probably going to do the right thing. And I carried a resentment for that drunk driver that killed my wife back in 79. The church had told me, Don, if you'll pray for him, you'll get over it. I prayed and he kept breathing. I came to Alcoholics Anonymous and some of you wise old said, Don, if you'll pray for him, the resentment will go away. Then I got me a resentment against you too. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I had a sponsor well enough versed in this to say it ain't about praying for him, Don. Nowhere in this book does it say if you've got a resentment for somebody to pray for him. It says to do something for them. And if you can do it anonymously, it'd be that much better. He had me write this drunk driver a letter. You see, I had talked to people about this till I was blue in the face. I had had psychiatrists say to me, Don, you're a victim and there's nothing you can do. You're just a victim. Let us give you these. I could have been the poster boy for these today. If you want to remain a victim, that's your business. If you want to see, the problem with being a victim is you've got to build and enhance resentments in order to continue being a victim. And that's deadly for me. I don't know about you, but that's deadly for me. So I wrote the letter to this guy, and my sponsor got some relief that I'd finally done something he asked me to do. I later got in my automobile and left Tyler, Texas, and drove to Nashville, Tennessee to see this guy. And I listened to what he had to say. And when I left there, after having said what I had to say, we were wrapped arm in arm, tears running down our faces, and the resentment left and has not returned to this day. So if you're one of those who does not believe that taking that night step will do something, don't come talk to me about it, please. I know of a fact, out of my experience, that when nothing else works, this works. When all else has failed, following simple principles works. I don't know a whole lot about being spiritual today, but I do know about living a principled life. And I do believe there's some power in living a principled life. I believe it's life-changing. It's revolutionary. It changes my perception of reality, whether reality changes or not. Just to the point that I can live comfortably with it and not have to take that first drink. Because I'm still about not taking that first drink. I always will be about not taking that first drink. There were other amends I tried to make and failed utterly at, I'm sure, did a poor job, but I always had sponsorship sharing with me what they would do in a similar situation. If they hadn't done it, they would send me to somebody who had done it. I'm going to tell you what making amends has done for me. It has undone my dark, ugly past, right now in the future, in the present, and has freed my future. Now, that may not mean anything to you, but if you've carried around that crap as long as I've carried it around, it means something. It means I ain't got to pick up that bottle tonight in order to get some relief over the crap that's rolling around inside my gut. I don't have to do that tonight because you showed me a way. Now, I'd like to tell you that my life has been nothing but perfect ever since I first took these steps. It's not true. I get myself in some jackpots. I told you, kind of skipping over the 6th and 7th step just kind of bit me in the butt. Well, it did. I'd been sober for a few years before I discovered it. Discovered that I had things going on just like I'd always had going on. You see, when I came to y'all, I had this problem. I heard y'all talking about stupid things you did while drinking. I thought, I must not be an alcoholic. I do those stupid things and I have to go drink to live with me because I did them. I wasn't concerned about the stupid things that I did while drinking. I knew you could give anybody the amount of booze that I took and they're going to do some crazy stuff. It was while trying to live sober I couldn't function. And I had to have a drink of alcohol. And unless the 6th and 7th step are made applicable in my life, I'm going to drink again and again and again. I thought for a long time I was going to have the power to remove those defects of character. Now, wouldn't that have been a screwed up deal? Because everything I thought was an asset was a defect, and everything I thought was a defect was an asset. In my thinking, in my doing. But I had sponsorship guiding me through this thing. A couple of years ago, I was reading on the 10th step, and I realized that I had myself in a jackpot one more time, and there was something I'd been failing to do. It says there's some things I'm to watch out for. And I ain't been watching out for them, and I found myself in the middle of a mess and didn't know where I was going to turn. I turned back to Alcoholics Anonymous and said, here's what I've done. What shall I do? And I was given instructions as to what to do. That's simple. That's simple. We came to the 11th step, and I'm still having problems with it. Big-time problems. You see, I still had no real belief in anything other than the people of Alcoholics Anonymous and the power of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. And one night I was at a step meeting, and somebody said, "This is where we are tonight." And they opened this up and they read it, and they were right. That is where I was. And I needed to hear it. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach and effective contact with Him as soon as we admitted the possible, not the probable, even slimmer, the possible existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe underlying the totality of all things. We began, only a beginning, to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided, I love those provisions in there, provided we took other simple steps. And I've been taking and retaking these other simple steps ever since. And when I take the 11th step now, I don't have to get down and argue about who God is, what God is, where God is, because you see, I found through this book that God is in here. And He's in here. I read somewhere one time, I sought out my soul I could not find. I sought out my God, and God eluded me. I sought out my brother, and I found all three. And that's been my experience in Alcoholics Anonymous. Which brings me to that wonderful step, the 12th step of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Let me share with you how it is in my life. I get the bent benders. I don't get the doctors, lawyers, and undertakers. I get them folks nobody will have. And they come to me, drunk, throwing up, puking. And I haul around the meetings. I've been on 12-step calls, doing it ways you ain't supposed to do it. I've gone by myself when I shouldn't have gone by myself. I've had guns pulled on me. I've had people threaten to do things to me bodily. I shouldn't have been in a position to let that happen, but guess what? I stayed sober. When all this other stuff I didn't believe was going to work, hauling another member of Alcoholics Anonymous or a prospective member of Alcoholics Anonymous to bring them to you, worked. I stayed sober. It worked. And I've thought about that a great deal. I mean, I don't have anything to share with them that you don't have to share. But I've thought about it so much that I have found that the closer I am to you, the closer I am to my God. If you get any closer than that, I don't want any part of it. I'm scared to death of it. I was thinking about David last night. What made me think of it was we had a fellow there in Tyler by the name of Frank K. If you never got to know Frank, you missed somebody special. 42 years and nearly 43 years sober, and Frank was riding with some folks to a meeting and went to sleep and died in this van. And Frank's widow called and wanted to know if I'd do the eulogy at his funeral. Y'all, I done lots of funerals in my time. But I've never done one like that one. Not that touched me the way that one did. That this drunk, that nobody wanted, that nobody would have, would be asked to come and to participate in doing something to help honor the life of one of the greatest men I'd ever known. And I thought about that last night as we were hearing about David, and I know what happens. You see, I hear people say all the time, I don't know the will of God. I read this book, I know the will of God. It's for me to get out here and help God's kids do what God's kids need doing. It may be frying a fish. It may be making a cup of coffee. It may be going to their house at midnight. It may be saying, why don't you come over here and bring your toothbrush and stay a day or two? We need to talk. That's what the will of God is for me, to try to help folks, not harm them. And I thought about old David yesterday because I knew David well. And I thought about Frank. Many years ago, David started on a spiritual journey. A long time ago. You could look at David and tell he'd been somewhere a long time. And he'd been walking this spiritual journey quite well for a long time. Built quite a relationship with God as he understood God. Just as Frank had, just as you have, and just as I have. The other afternoon, David was on that journey with his God. And God looked to him and said, you know, David, we're closer to my house tonight than we are to your house. Why don't you come on home with me? One of these days that's going to happen to me, and it's going to happen to you. I hope that when it does, that our spiritual house is in order. And I know that it will be if we're doing these things. There's a story that Bill wrote in the big book, and it's only 2 or 3 words. It means a great deal to me, and I like to close with it. He says, we must. I know y'all think there ain't no must, but it says we must act the Good Samaritan every day if need be. Now, I thought about that story a great deal. I don't know but one story called the Good Samaritan. I bet you remember it from your childhood. The little carpenter told it. There was this guy who had been beaten and robbed and thrown in a ditch. And along on 2 different occasions come these 2 religious men. And I used to give those religious men the devil because they didn't help that guy. I know now why they didn't help him. They didn't know how. Just like those religious people that tried to help me. They didn't know how. And they had to pass on by. But along comes some fellow, we only know him as the Good Samaritan. He's as anonymous as he can be. And he gets down off his animal, gets down in that ditch and cleans that feller up. Sets him upon the animal and he walks. And takes him to an inn and says, look, here's the money for this guy. If that's not enough when I pass back, I will repay you. I would bet you my last dollar that guy'd been in the ditch sometime or another. And somebody helped him get out. You know what the little carpenter said after he told that story? The only time he ever issued these words, you go and do likewise. And I had to go to hell in order to come to Alcoholics Anonymous to understand what he was talking about. I don't know about you, but I know about me. If I will do just that, I'm going to stay sober. And I'm going to stay reasonably happy. I suspect you will too. And I don't know about the fellow who's in the ditch, whether he will or not. But I know we will. Thank you so much for letting me share today.
Don, the Vicksburg group would like to give you this little token of our appreciation for you coming to Vicksburg and sharing your story with us. Thank you so much.
For additional copies of this cassette or a catalog of other 12-step tapes, call Encore at 1-800-878-1308 or visit our website at www.12steptapes.com.
I'm going to ask, before we close, I'm going to ask my little baby nun to come up and read the promises out of the big book found on page 83 and 84 for us so that we can understand part of the results of this program. Angela?
No, I can't reject on the spot, huh?
Right there.
Okay.
Right there.
Just this one?
No. There.
All the way to there? If we are painstaking about this phase of our development, we will be amazed before we are halfway through. We are going to know a freedom and a new happiness. We will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. We will comprehend the word serenity and we will know peace. No matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. That feeling of uselessness and self-pity will disappear. We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. Self-seeking will slip away. Our whole attitude and outlook upon life will change. Fear of people and of economic insecurity will leave us. We will intuitively know how to handle situations which used to baffle us. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we could not do for ourselves.
Thank y'all for letting me chair this meeting. David, have you got anything special you want to say? Where's David? Do you want to say anything? You sure? Okay, well, let's close this meeting in our usual manner with a